Guys, welcome back to another Brookowski's YouTube video. Today we got our top 24 wide receivers for week 8 of fantasy football. And boys, before we get into it, we created an absolutely free group chat on Chalkboard. On there, we give our full rankings, QB, wide receiver, tight end, and RB. We got trade advice, waiver wire targets, so much free stuff to help you win your matchup on our Chalkboard. It's the first link in the description. First player, again, like we say every single receiver video, number 1 is Cooper Kupp. He is just clearly the wide receiver 1 in fantasy. Now, wide receiver 2, basically the same thing. It's Justin Jefferson. Every single week, both these guys have to be in your starting lineup. And at number 3, we have the current number 1 scoring receiver in fantasy football, Stephon Diggs. He has been phenomenal this year. It's a bit of a tough matchup against the Packers, but again, still think he has crazy upside. Our first wide receiver 1 is Tyreek Hill. He's been balling all year. Last week, we expected a little bit more. He did good, but not amazing against the Steelers. This week, though, going against the Lions, it's an amazing matchup. The Lions are bad at everything on defense. Bad against the pass, bad against the run. Tyreek could explode in week 8. And at receiver number 5, we got Devontae Adams. One of the best receivers in the NFL. Always has great fantasy upside. It also is pretty safe for fantasy. Basically gets tons of targets. Great connection with Derek Carr. Could be a tough matchup against the Saints, but Saints also have struggled against receivers, so it's a bit of an unknown there, but again, Devontae Adams is elite for fantasy. Our wide receiver 6 this week is Jamar Chase. Jamar Chase has been balling recently. Last 2 weeks, over 130 yards in both games. Last week had those 2 deep touchdowns. He's been amazing this week. The matchup isn't amazing. I don't love him against the Browns. It's not terrible. He's still an elite wide receiver 1. He's still great for fantasy. First player in borderline receiver 1 is AJ Brown. Great matchup. Steelers are the second worst team against wide receivers in fantasy football. Obviously, AJ Brown has been balling this year, one of the top 10 receivers for fantasy. No questions about it. Great connection with Jalen Hurts. The whole Eagles team looks amazing. Great matchup. Love AJ Brown this week. And next up at wide receiver 8, we have Mike Evans. Hasn't been amazing. He would have had a great game last game if he didn't drop that wide open deep touchdown. A few weeks ago showed his insane upside. This week against the Ravens. The Ravens aren't that good against wide receivers. It could be a shootout type game. Mike Evans is great in week 8. Wide receiver number 9, we got Deebo Samuel. Yes, he is questionable. This is assuming he does play. And he has to be this high because he owns the Rams. Balls out every single time, averages over 20 points when he plays the Rams the past few games. Again, he has been amazing against them. If he plays, he must be in your fantasy lineup. And next up, our wide receiver 10 is DeAndre Hopkins. Hopkins showed some insane upside last week. 14 targets, and he wasn't even used in the red zone, really. If he starts getting used in the red zone, he could have sky-high upside. Again, we do think the targets are going to go down a little bit. It was Diop's first game back. The Cardinals were kind of blowing them out. They're just trying to get that connection going. Either way, though, this could be a super high-scoring game against the Vikings, and DeAndre Hopkins is a great start. At wide receiver 11, we got Chris Godwin. Just like Mike Evans, both got force-fed targets last week. I believe Evans had 15, Godwin had 13. This offense has been a little bit out of sync, meaning they couldn't be a little bit higher in the rankings. But again, pretty solid matchup against the Ravens on Thursday Night Football, so it's a primetime game. Hopefully Tom Brady can get his act together, and both these Bucs receivers have great upside. And our last wide receiver 1 of the video is Jalen Waddle. Jalen Waddle looked pretty good last week. He didn't have any touchdowns, only had 4 catches, but had over 80 yards. This Dolphins offense, like we said about Tyreek Hill, could explode. The Detroit Lions are terrible against everything on defense. We love Waddle. First player in the elite wide receiver 2, we got Amon-Ra St. Brown. Hasn't been great recently. Left last game with another injury, had a bye week before, and then the week before that, didn't play very much, didn't put up very much fantasy points. But again, we still think he has great upside. When he is fully healthy and plays over 50% of snaps, he averages, I believe, over 20 fantasy points. Super good number, super high upside. As long as he stays healthy, he needs to be in your fantasy lineup. Next up at wide receiver 14, we have CeeDee Lamb. CeeDee Lamb last week, we thought he'd be a bit better. Got some targets, not a ton. Zeke got the touchdowns in week 1, though. He had a terrible game, but with Dak, he had 11 targets. For sure has target upside. This week against the Bears, it's a pretty good matchup, and we like him this week. At wide receiver 15, we got T. Higgins. This whole Bengals offense has been awesome. Last week, Burrow, Chase, and Tyler Boyd all went off. Wasn't T. Higgins, but again, T. Higgins is normally the number 2, or you could say 1B in this offense. Gets tons of targets, tons of upside, and it's a pretty solid matchup against the Browns. And at wide receiver 16, we have Chris Olave. He has been feasting recently without Michael Thomas and Jarvis Landry. If either of them play, especially Michael Thomas, he might move down a little bit on the rankings, but we expect them probably not to play. Against the Raiders, it's a pretty solid matchup. Chris Olave is a great start. Next up, first player in wide receiver 2 tier, Tyler Lockett. DK Metcalf, very good chance he's miss this game, which makes Tyler Lockett the clear wide receiver 1 in this offense, which gives him upside. This offense has been surprisingly super good. Geno's been super good as well. And again, Not the greatest matchup against the Giants. They've been tough against wide receivers, but Christian Kirk had a pretty good week last week. Tyler Lockett has good upside being the clear wide receiver 1 in this offense. And next up at wide receiver 18, we have Michael Pittman. He fell pretty far from last week because Sam Ehlinger is now the QB for the rest of the season. 2 weeks ago, Pittman looked amazing. I think easily over 20 points. He was a beast. Last week was a bit disappointing. There's just too many unknowns in this offense to put him any higher on. Next up, we got Christian Kirk. Again, it was a tough matchup last week, but he still had a good game against the Giants. Another super tough matchup against the Broncos. They're one of the top 3 teams against wide receivers in fantasy football. Game is going to be played in London, so they have to travel over there. Jaguars play there a ton, though, so they should have a home crowd advantage. But again, Christian Kirk, tough matchup, but he's proven to have success even against those. So like his upside as a mid wide receiver too. At wide receiver 20, we have Amari Cooper. Amari Cooper is playing at home, and for some reason, he loves playing at home, averaging over 20 fantasy points per game at home, or at least close to 20 away. He plays way worse. This week, going against Cincinnati, it may not be the best matchup, but it's not the worst. I think it's a solid start as a wide receiver too. And at wide receiver 21, we got Gabriel Davis. Again, every single week, super boom or bust. He gets a long touchdown, tons of points, doesn't get a touchdown. Has those super low floor games. Primetime at home versus the Green Bay Packers. Tons of upside, could be a great game. Again, if he scores a long touchdown, tons of upside this week. Now, wide receiver 22, we have Allen Lazard. He's been pretty decent, I think 10 or more points in the last 5 weeks. But the thing is, the matchup is just so tough against Buffalo, and Aaron Rodgers just hasn't been looking amazing. Aaron Jones was great last week, but I think Lazard got 11 points, which isn't bad, isn't terrible. It's a really tough matchup, so he's a low-end wide receiver too. Next up, we got DJ Moore. We were expecting this whole offense to be awful last week. They were surprisingly pretty good, beat the Buccaneers, and he had a pretty good connection with PJ Walker. Had a touchdown, over 15 fantasy points, looked pretty great, and it's a great matchup again versus the Atlanta Falcons. DJ Moore is pretty solid upside this week. He's a low-end wide receiver too for us. And our last wide receiver of the video is Devontae Smith. He's shown his upside in the past, got a touchdown last week. A couple weeks ago, had 28.9 points. He has been pretty solid, but this week, the thing that could hurt him is a blowout. The Eagles are favored by 10.5 to 11 points against the Steelers. If they're winning by a ton, they might just run the ball more. Smith is good, but not amazing. He's a low-end wide receiver too. And guys, thank you so much for watching the video. Again, if you want to join the free group chat with all of our extra rankings, first link in the description. Thank you guys for watching. See you guys next time.